Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fantastic Films here at CONjuration. So thank you guys for joining me. And my name is Christi J. Whitney, and I've been going to CONjuration for the last 3 years. So excited to find this very family-oriented kind of convention that you just feel like you know everybody the moment that you step through the door. So I was so excited that we were doing everything virtual and that I was asked by Chris to do one of the panels. So today we are going to be chatting about two particular Harry Potter fan films, and that is Severus Snape and the Marauders, and the follow-up, which is actually a radio play / podcast, The Great Wizarding War. So before we get started, just briefly introducing myself. As I said, I've been going to CONjuration for a little while. I am a young adult fantasy author, so I've written a trilogy of books working on some other things. I also am a theater director and actor, and I also teach high school English and literature. And just like most of us here, a super, super big Harry Potter fan. And if you can't tell from the things behind me, I am most definitely in Slytherin house, must represent my house, so go Snakes. And I also have a hobby of cosplaying as Professor Snape, mostly in the realm of TikTok. So if I have any TikTok cosplayers out there, I would love to connect with you guys on TikTok, and you can find me there at Christi J. Whitney, and I'll be the one dressed up like Snape. So without further ado, I just want to get started by giving a little background of Severus Snape and the Marauders. Hopefully anyone that is joining has seen the movie. If you haven't, it's going to be a lot of spoilers, unfortunately, but I feel like I should read a little background. So first and foremost, let me talk about the director / screenplay writer for the films. His name is Justin Zagri. I was very privileged just a few weeks ago to interview both him and the film's composer, Alexander Ardson, on my podcast. I have a new podcast on my YouTube channel called Quills and Cloaks, where we talk about all things Slytherin and Snape and Harry Potter, and occasionally some writing tips and advice for new writers out there. So I was able to interview them on my podcast. We had a fantastic time. I was able to get some kind of behind the scenes insight from the director, and we'll be talking about that a little bit as well. But Justin Zagri is most well known for his short films, The Greater Good, which was a Harry Potter fan film before this, Severus Snape and the Marauders, which actually premiered on the YouTube channel Broad Strokes Productions in 2016. It won the Best Fan Film and the Best of Fest at 2018 Geek Fest Film Festival. It's been reviewed by Entertainment Weekly and BuzzFeed, among many others. And then they are currently working on the Great Wizarding War radio drama. And I think that they are about to put up episode 10 out of the 12-part series. So if any of you have seen Snape and the Marauders but have not tuned in to the radio play, I highly recommend that you do that. It is fantastic. It's all the original cast, the same writers, lots of great music, and it picks up at the very moment that Severus Snape and the Marauders film ends. So it's very cool. And again, for those of you that don't know anything about the background of Severus Snape and the Marauders, and yes, I'm a teacher, so I have notes. Basically, the premise is 4 friends celebrate at a bar graduating Hogwarts and contemplate their future when an old rival arrives. Knowing what side Severus Snape will fight on in the war, James Potter and the Marauders confront Snape for the final time. So it's a premise. I think it's something that a lot of Harry Potter fans have been asking for quite a while. The idea of Snape and the Marauders getting together sort of this one final time before the Wizarding War occurs, because there are so many empty holes, empty plot holes that are left in. What happened with Snape after, the moment, the mudblood moment, and when they sort of parted ways? What happened with James? And, because we know that he couldn't have immediately just become this amazing, wonderful, perfect guy that Lily Evans wanted to date and eventually marry. So there had to be some sort of change, because I think most of us can agree that James Potter was not a very good character when he was in his teen years. So, what happened in that in-between time? So I was asking Justin Zagri about that. And he said, yeah, he had a lot of people talk to him about that moment. What could have happened? What ifs before the Wizarding War? And so he thought that sounded intriguing. So he went back to all the books and immediately started delving in, looking for any reference in the book series related to the Marauders, related to Snape, all the incidences that happened between them. And he started cultivating a script from there. And they were able to produce this film on really a shoestring budget. It was about $28,000 that they were able to crowdsource from people. They filmed it over the course of about 3 days. They had a fairly quick casting process. It took them a little while longer to find sort of that perfect younger Severus Snape. And I think they did a phenomenal job with casting. It's my just humble opinion, but I really truly see them as kind of canon characters. They're so solidified in my mind that when I think of younger Marauders now, I tend to think of this particular cast in my head when I'm kind of playing with that in my mind. And I do a lot of TikTok videos that are related to younger Snape and the Marauders, and these guys are totally the ones I see. So shoestring budget. They were able to get in this film composer, Alexander Ardson, who Justin had met not in college, but he had seen a flyer because the composer was just a teenager. I think he was a senior in high school at the time, and he was putting out flyers saying that, he would be willing to compose student films at the college where Justin was, and that's how they met. And Alexander has actually done the scores for all of Justin's short films, and if you've seen any of his other projects, they're amazing. But it was kind of neat to pick Justin's brain and Alexander's brain with how do you come about creating this story? How do you tell this story through music? How do you tell this story through dialogue? So if you're interested, you, of course, are more than welcome to listen to the interview on my podcast, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So in Severus Snape and the Marauders fan film, and we all have different opinions, but I really haven't met anyone that truly hated it. I think we all have things that we like and don't like about the fan film, but I think most people were very pleased with the way that it turned out. And I'm not an expert on all Harry Potter fan films out there. Some of you guys may have watched everything. I've seen some of the big ones, the Sisters Black or the House of Black, and some of the other sort of big ones out on YouTube. But a lot of you guys out there may know far more fan films that you can recommend that I don't know. So towards the end of this, we'll definitely talk about other recommendations that you guys might have for fan films. But I sort of stumbled upon this one maybe just a few months after they had released it onto YouTube. I think it had already gotten up to 1 million views. And I don't remember, I think it was, I just stumbled upon it. But what immediately struck me about this fan film that I believe separated it from so many of the other really great Harry Potter fan films out there were the following categories. One, the script. I believe that the writing was very accurate to the writing from the books, how the characters talked, how they interacted with each other. And Justin said, that he went back and really poured over all of the books because he did want to be true to what was created in that world. And yes, he created these moments and these scenes that, they're not canon, they weren't in the books, but could very likely have been. And that's really what the fan film does. It tries to answer the story, what could have happened with Snape and the Marauders after graduation had they met up, one final time before the war began. So I think the script was a strong point with Severus Snape and the Marauders. I think the quality of the casting, the quality of the actors was really top notch. And it was interesting to hear the casting process. As a theater director, I'm always super into the casting process. How did you find this person? What worked with this one? And I remember Justin saying, we didn't want our Snape to just be a younger version of Alan Rickman, because I think we can all say that when we picture Snape, we're 99% of the time going to picture Alan Rickman in our heads. It's just, he is so solidified in the Harry Potter, fandom as Snape, even though book Snape and movie Snape are very, very different. And to me, in my head, when I see things Snape related, it is sort of a mesh of the person that I pictured in the books when I read them, and then of course Alan Rickman's performance. So Justin, the director, said, they didn't want to do a younger version of Alan Rickman, but you can't ignore Alan's performance at the same time, because it's so much in our psyche. So when they got Mick Ignis to do the role of Professor Snape, or not professor because he wasn't a professor yet, but Severus Snape, it is, I think, a good blend of sort of keeping a little Alan-esque feel. Justin said there would be some times when he would deliver certain lines of dialogue and they would just say, "You just Rickman that," or "You just Alan Rickman that," because it totally sounded like Alan Rickman. And I think when you watch the film, you can even sort of pinpoint a little bit of those pieces of dialogue where you kind of slip into Alan Rickman. I don't think you can help slipping into the role of Alan Rickman a little bit, but he really brought his own version of Snape, and a Snape that is far more emotional than what we're used to seeing in the films. Now, if you are a fan of the books, you guys realize that Snape was really emotional. Alan Rickman played him very close to the vest a lot more, and his performance was very up here and very muted, and everything was very subtle. But the Severus Snape in the book series was far more emotional. You see moments of him sort of losing it on Harry Potter or screaming at Harry Potter in moments of the book, far more than the film. So I think that they played very true to that with younger Snape in Severus Snape and the Marauders. Very emotional. He had not yet, I think, learned to truly hide those emotions. He had not really become that person that we know a little bit later after he becomes a Death Eater and really and his powers have solidified. So he's strong. He's grown a lot. He, of course, easily best the Marauders there, but emotionally, he has not moved on to that adulthood moment yet. So that's sort of slightly unhinged, very emotional Snape. I think they do a very good job in Snape and the Marauders of portraying that. And on the opposite end of that, with the Marauders themselves, again, we are seeing a group of young men who are not the 15, 16-year-olds that we saw from the book series that play the prank on Snape and nearly get him killed, but they are clearly not the adults that we see much later who are fighting in the Order of the Phoenix, and especially James Potter, who becomes this man that steps in front of Voldemort to try to protect his wife and his newborn son. So yes, and I think Snape fans can weigh in on some of that for sure. But so we're seeing them at a sort of moment in time where they are not these particular characters from the books, but they are not yet the adults that we see in the books. And I think James Potter in particular, and again, I'm very pro Snape. I kind of am. I always love playing devil's advocate, and I love talking about Snape because he is a gray character. Some people hate him, some people love him, some people in between, and that's what I think makes him a great character. But I'm pro Snape in that what I enjoy about Severus Snape and the Marauders is I think it presents a much wider view of both Snape and where he was coming from, but also the Marauders. The director said when we were chatting that it was very important to him that the film did not lean one way or the other. If you truly watch the film, it's not a pro Snape film, and it's not a pro-Marauders film. I think they try to take a more realistic view of, you can see where Snape is coming from, but you also see where the Marauders are and where they eventually end up. But again, being a Snape fan, I do like that we hear from both sides of the story, and you can kind of, to me, it's very telling, going back to why Snape has sort of the issues with the Marauders that he does. So I do think that the cast plays a phenomenal role in bringing that. There's not a character in this film that is entirely likable. James Potter is not likable in this, but you see the glimmers and you see the potential of change. By the end of this film, he's had a moment where he's realizing this is not the path I want to go down. This is not the person I need to be. But they had to start him at this point, because otherwise it doesn't make sense what we see happening to James throughout the rest of the story, and which they continue in the radio play. So the script, the quality of the cast and the acting, I think really sets Snape and the Marauders above a lot of the other fan films. The cinematography, it was shot out at night, like I said, a course of 3 days. They had one day where it rained much of the day, and they were very stressed out about that because, well, Justin said the rest of the cast was having a blast. They had excellent chemistry, as I think we can see on screen, and they got along great. But he said he was off to the side with the director hat on, freaking out and panicking because the rain wasn't stopping. They only had one more day to shoot. He had everything else lined up that he needed to shoot, and he was really stressed out about it. But he said they did manage to shoot almost everything chronologically, which for a film, that is pretty unusual. But he said it worked out really well because it added to the building of the emotions as everything escalates throughout the course of the film. So I think definitely you can tell that there was more chronological shooting. So the cinematography, the way it was shot, I think was very well done. You can see his professional director's eye, the close-ups, the over the shoulders, who he chooses to focus on in different scenes, I think was extremely well done. And also adding to that, the special effects. When you think about the budget being $28,000, and that included everything, I believe the use of special effects in this fan film was really stunning to what they were able to do. And he does credit, his production team and the people who were in charge of audio and sound and special effects with really 100% diving into that. And I think that's why we love Harry Potter fan films so much, because they're made out of pure love for the fandom, out of pure love for these characters and for the book series. And so people are very invested in it and willing to go above and beyond in just producing, the highest quality content that they can produce. So special effects, I think, were just really well done, and they were very specific. They really sat down and talked about what would this spell do? What would the effect be of this spell? So much of the spell casting is wordless in battles like this. So how could they effectively show what some of these spells were doing when they're not necessarily saying the spells out loud? And even adding some unique spell casting from the film, where, if it's shooting arrows at someone or whatever that might be. So taking a lot of time to think about what this battle is going to look like, to sketch it out, to really plot it out, and to add those particular effects, I think really set it apart. And then the last thing, in my opinion, that I think carries this film maybe a head and shoulders above a lot of the other ones out there was the music score. And that was one of the reasons I was so keen on interviewing Alexander Ardson. And it was kind of a cool story on my end with how I was able to connect with the composer of the film. My 17-year-old son, who plays cello in his high school orchestra, he also saw the fan film, and he and I immediately geeked out over it. We loved the fan film and both connected with the music because he and I both have a music background. So unbeknownst to me, one day last year, he actually went and went onto Alexander's website and contacted him and just said, hey, you know, I play cello in the orchestra. I was just wondering, is there a written score available to purchase for Severus Snape and the Marauders? And almost immediately, Alexander wrote him back and sent him the written score to the theme song, the one that is played at the beginning and the end of the film. Just sent it to my son. And that super, super impressed me that, you know, he is a professional composer. This is what he does for a living. He keeps extremely busy out in LA with independent films and also other films that he does. And the fact that he would take time out to send, you know, this teenage cello player the written score free of charge and just said, you know, here you go, thanks. And I talked to the composer about that, and he was just really passionate about wanting to help other artists, other budding artists, because he said when he was young, he had those mentors that were in his life and helped him out and, you know, kind of encouraged him and moved him along. So, I found out that there had been high school orchestras that have performed some of the pieces of music from Severus Snape and the Marauders, and that he's actually been able to physically attend a couple of those. And that really struck me as something different. Both he and Justin, the director, are very collaborative and very open to helping others along. And that meant a lot to me. You know, I just said, hey, I'm starting this new podcast. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a struggling, author, and, you know, you're just trying to get your works out there and getting people to read them and all of that. And they were immediately, yes, absolutely, anything that we can do to help. I think that kind of attitude carries over into the fan film. I think you can see the collaborative effort. I think we can see the chemistry, and I think that we can see the attention to detail that everyone from the director on down to, you know, to audio, to props, to everything, we can see the attention to detail that was given to this fan film. So I really truly believe that whether it's a theater production or whether it's a film, it starts with that director and the producer, their attitude towards the material, their attitude to quality, and to taking time to make sure that things are accurate and well done. I think that filters down all the way through the rest of the cast and crew. So when I watched this fan film for the first time, those were the things that struck me. Aside from the fact that it was so Snape heavy, and my Snape heart just absolutely loved it. But those were some amazing and major moments of the fan film. Now, before we get on to any questions that anybody might have, and of course you're welcome to leave anything in the comments, and I love to respond to either a question, or if you have a comment on your opinions, we're definitely going to get to that, because I always love to hear what everybody else thinks about fan films, and in particular these two. But the second part of Severus Snape and the Marauders is the radio play. And again, for those of you that are not familiar with it, it literally picks up from that exact moment where the fan film ends. So episode 1 opens up, and you have Remus Lupin in the hospital, bleeding out from Snape's Sectum Sempra spell. And, you know, the Marauders have sort of disbanded. Lily is not happy with James. They're not even talking. And then, of course, on the other side of things, Severus Snape being pulled in to the Death Eaters and kind of invited in. And you're starting to see how the Death Eaters are growing in power, what they're doing, what their plans are with these raids, and this build up to this great wizarding war. So it doesn't miss a beat. And while, you know, the fans really wanted a sequel movie, but we know that they were not allowed to do that. Warner Brothers was kind of gracious to them and saying, hey, we think you did a phenomenal job with this fan film, but you can't raise money to do this anymore, you know, copyright, and this is Harry Potter world. And so they could not do another film, but they just felt really strongly about this story and how they wanted it to be able to have a definite ending and to move through up to the Wizarding War. So this became a labor of love from Justin and also Garrett Zwackwalser, I think is his last name, who plays James Potter. Also Mick Ignis, who plays Severus Snape, stepped on as producer, and really just doing this as a labor of love. They were not, they couldn't crowdsource for it or collect any more money for it like they had done for the first film. So truly out of a love for the story, a love for storytelling, and just the desire to get the rest of this story out to the world. So, it has taken them longer to get each episode in because, they have full-time jobs and they're working on other projects, but super passionate about getting things right. So same film composers, same writers, same audio and sound engineers who really have enjoyed, they said, getting to do the radio play because you don't have anything visual to go off with in a radio play. So music and sound effects become everything for location, for the atmosphere of the story, for telling what's going on. So they've really gotten to play a lot more in this new sandbox of a radio play. And Justin said, learning as they go along. So again, if you have not listened to The Great Wizarding War, you can find it on Apple Podcast. You can also find it on Broad Strokes Productions YouTube channel. And I don't believe episode 10 is out yet, or if it is, it's just come out. So I've caught up to episode 9, but I would definitely encourage you guys to listen because it gets grittier. It gets a lot into the politics behind the Wizarding War, and especially the politics of the Death Eaters, which I think is a lot of fun. And you're starting to see James Potter's transformation because, again, being pro Snape as I am, I'm not a big fan of James. However, we have to acknowledge that at some point in time, James did change. He was a jerk, a bully, arrogant, prideful, treated Snape terribly, did not treat Lily with respect. But at some point, he did change. And I don't think it was he just woke up one day, snap of the fingers, and he changed. I think it was a process in the same way that I think Snape changed, and it was a process. So you're getting to see a little bit of that in The Great Wizarding War, how he goes from what he thinks about life and what he thinks about the world and his friendships with the Marauders and what he's going to do. And when all of that gets taken away from James, how does he pick up the pieces? He's struggling with his parents' illness. He's got a lot of things that are being put on his plate. And you start to watch the growing up process happen with James. You also get to see that with Remus, and you get to see that with Sirius. And I'm always fascinated by that. And yeah, having a child, I think definitely, Matthew, will, change you. And I think that sort of completed the process for James. Is all of a sudden it wasn't about him or even about him and Lily, but he had this life, this person, this child to care for. So I'm fascinated by the characterization of change with characters, because I don't think most characters are all one side or the other. We're a little bit of everything. And if you're just too perfect on this side, there's nothing relatable for your audience. So it's fun to watch him change. It's also painful but entertaining to watch someone like Snape change and know that if he had made different decisions, if A, B, and C had been different, would he have ended up in a different spot? So that kind of thing, as a literature person, as a teacher, I'm always fascinated by it. And we always do a study in my literature classes. We study a different Harry Potter novel, and we use that for the hero's journey. And we also use that to look at a Byronic hero and an anti-hero in the character of Snape. So I usually show Severus Snape and the Marauders as a supplementary device in my literature classes for characterization, picking out motivation, why a character says and does and thinks the things that they do. So that to me has been, a really unique experience. Do I think that there will be a time where Warner Brothers actually brings these creators to officially make fan films? I would love it. When you deal with a big entity such as Warner Brothers and things like that, it doesn't seem like it's going to be something that's going to happen. But man, I wish that it would, especially in things such as, people have been screaming for years, we want a Marauders era something, a prequel, something that deals with the Marauders and Snape and all of the adults when they were younger. And I think Warner Brothers would be smart to pull in some of these people because they've done the research. They're passionate about it. They know the background. I mean, they can tell great stories. And I mean, we can keep fingers crossed, but for right now, I think Snape and the Marauders is one of the best things that we do have. So I appreciate having a little, even if it's just a little bit, a sort of little in-between point between Harry's world and when Harry enters and the things that we know of the Marauders and their era. So that's kind of, where I am with the fan film. And, I won't delve too much into things like Snape related and all that related, because that's kind of a panel in and of itself. We have debates in my class all the time. And I know that, at CONjuration last year, and we've done it many times before, was Snape a good guy or a bad guy? Was he guilty? Was he innocent? But it's just one of the things that I love to play devil's advocate for. And it's also one of the things where I think you can see the bad someone does, but you can also understand where some of it came from. It doesn't mean that you excuse it, but it's nice to have it. The Slytherin and Ravenclaw inside me loves to pick apart a character, their motivations, what went on in their environment to create the person that they became, and is that person capable of change? We see it in James Potter. I think more people allot James Potter the ability to change than allot Snape the ability to change. But I think bottom line is human beings are capable of change. And I think that's part of the human experience and hope, that if we don't think there's a possibility of change, a possibility to redeem our mistakes, then it takes a lot of hope out of the human experience. But it's interesting to see where a person comes from. And I really think Justin Zagri, as the director and the writer, did a fantastic job of peeling away the things that were not said specifically in the books. He took every moment from the book series, everything that J.K. Rowling said that happened between the Marauders, both from Snape's point of view and their point of view, and then just sort of filtered in his own version of what if. Do I believe it was highly likely that James would have confronted Snape one last time because he sees that he's going in this direction and he thinks in pure Gryffindor spirit, right, justice, my cause is the right cause. We need to teach him a lesson. We need to make sure that he's going to fear us when the time comes, as James says. Absolutely. I feel that is 100% in James's character. Lupin trying to discourage it, definitely in his character. Peter standing over there on the side, and Sirius, true to form, I've got your back, mate, whatever that's going to be. One more time picking. Do I believe that Severus would have tried to apologize to Lily one more time? I think according to everything that we've read about that, we know how much that devastated him inside, and the unforgiveness. And we know that he tried to apologize when they were in school. I do believe all of that setup works. It makes sense. Whether it would have happened or not, that's not really a deciding factor, but could it have happened? I 100% definitely think so. And the battle, how it went down, definitely. I think we have to acknowledge at that point, Snape was a pretty stinking powerful wizard. And I believe that I've read multiple places that, a lot of people say that outside of Dumbledore, in this era, outside of like Dumbledore and Voldemort, Snape would have been right up there as far as power goes. So I think we're starting to see that power in Severus Snape and the Marauders. And of course, why else would Voldemort seek him out? What has he seen in Severus that he could use? And he knows how to use pain. He knows how to use hurt. He knows how to take someone's vulnerable moment and twist it over to his side. And he found Snape at a very vulnerable moment. I think all that is very probable. So I have to give kudos to them for, we don't have to say that's 100% what would have happened, but I do think it is highly probable that something like that could have gone down. Okay, so we've got a few minutes, and I have no idea how many of you guys are here or hanging out, but if you have a comment on the fan film, it could be a scene that you liked, a character that you liked or did not. I'd love to hear it. James Potter, chaotic good. Snape, lawful good. Where do you think they stand? Ooh, that's a good question. And if you guys have, I'd love to hear your opinion on where you think James Potter and Severus Snape stand. Is James chaotic good? Is Snape lawful good? If you guys have opinions on that, I would love to hear that, because it's sort of that constant debate that we have about James. And I think also a lot of us feel a certain way about characters based on our own experience. If you've had an experience with bullying, or bullying was part of your past, I think that there's something in you that understands something about Snape, maybe more than someone who never had that experience. I was talking to a friend of mine in the UK. We were doing a podcast together about Snape, and she had a very intense bullying experience when she was in high school. And, you know, I think we can all agree that bullying is it's not something to be set aside, and it needs to be dealt with, because we have adults who were never able to deal with that properly and healthily, and it affects you as an adult. Otherwise, it wouldn't be such a big deal for us to campaign against bullying. What I think in Snape's case, unfortunately and very tragically for him, he never dealt with it in a healthy way. He didn't have someone to talk to, a counselor, a mentor, somebody to healthily express that trauma in his life and be able to use that trauma to make you a better person. I think it made him a stronger person, but I don't think it made him a healthier person. And, you know, talking to people who have experienced that, you can kind of see how, if that had been dealt with in another way, could he have had a different outcome? And I don't think a lot of people want to kind of push aside the bullying thing with James, seeing it as being like one thing that just happened like one time. You know, if you saw the films, oh, he flipped him upside down, but realizing that it started on the train when they were 11 and it continued for years. And we don't really know if it continued even after that, and Lily didn't know about it. I feel it's probable that James continued to bully on the side, because I think it's very much canon that we see he's very two-sided, presents himself one way to Lily, does another thing with his bullying. So, you know, I think, like I said, and for James and for anyone else, it has a lot to do with our life experience and how we view a character. That's why I think we love different characters, and someone could absolutely love and relate to this character, and another person go, I don't get that at all. And I always tell my students, that's the beauty of literature and characters, is you don't have to like the same character I do. You don't have to understand this character or relate to this character. But if there's one character in there that you can kind of grab hold of and say, I get that person, I see a little of myself in that person, then that's just great literature. That's great writing. That's great filmmaking. And the world of storytelling is big enough to involve all of us. And we all have different life experiences. So we're all going to come at literature differently. And I love being able to discuss that. So are there any other comments? If there was a favorite character, least favorite character, favorite scene, or a moment from Severus Snape and the Marauders, I would love to hear your comments on that. I had so many, but I just really believe the dialogue was gut-wrenching. Snape's dialogue in particular was gut-wrenching to me, because it just made you want to say there was so much potential in this person. And look what happened. And he went off the rails, and he made these decisions, and he screwed up, and he went down a wrong path he shouldn't have. And you know, I just think that that's fun to listen to the wealth of pain inside him, especially when he says to James, you have no idea what it is to be me. You have no idea what it is to lose something. I think that's such a powerful and very canon-like line from Severus Snape, because it is true. Up to that point, James doesn't. Now we know that eventually he does very much understand that, but at this point, that point in stage, he doesn't. He's gotten everything he's ever wanted. He was always allowed to break the rules, never had any repercussions that we see in the books for anything that he did, including being involved in a prank that nearly got Snape killed. And the only thing that happened was Dumbledore told Snape, you can't ever say anything about this incident ever. So, Snape sees him as a kid, as the spoiled kid that always got everything he wanted. And I don't see really much in the books to show otherwise. That's why I think it took a while for James to make that change and become that better person that I believe he was. We're not saying James is evil inside. There was a good person inside. And I just think it took a little longer for him to get to that point. But such a telling line for me from Snape's point of view. You have no idea what it's like to be me. I felt that deep in my bones when I watched that film. So we've got about 5 minutes left. And again, if you've got any other comments or anything, feel free to throw them up and I'll try to answer to them. But again, if you have not watched Severus Snape and the Marauders and you are a Harry Potter fan, definitely watch it. If nothing else, it just gives you a new and sort of interesting, fresh perspective of the Marauders post-graduation and of Snape post-graduation. And then again, I encourage you guys to listen to The Great Wizarding War. The episodes are not very long and they're just really easy to just kind of listen to. And on top of that, on the podcast, they do the Wizarding World Talks Back, where they sit down with the director, they sit down with the actors, they also sit down with sound design and other things and just kind of pick apart. And again, for me being the theater person and the director person, I just eat that sort of stuff up. But I would definitely recommend The Great Wizarding War as well. And then, like I said, if you are a TikTok person and you do TikTok, you like to cosplay on TikTok, there's a huge Harry Potter cosplay community on TikTok. It's been phenomenal for me. And follow me there, definitely at Christi J. Whitney at TikTok. And thank you, Anna, for saying that. Where can you watch where can you watch Severus Snape and the Marauders? Go to YouTube. It's Broad Strokes Productions, but if you just simply go to YouTube and enter Severus Snape and the Marauders, it will pull up on YouTube. It was released on YouTube, so that is the place to go. Severus Snape and the Marauders, Broad Strokes Productions. And then for The Great Wizarding War, if you want to listen to it as it's a radio play, it is available on Apple Podcast, The Great Wizarding War, or you can also go to Broad Strokes Productions YouTube channel and The Great Wizarding War. All of the episodes, as well as the talkbacks, are on their YouTube. So those are the two best places to find The Great Wizarding War. So again, thank you guys so much for joining in with me. I hope that you guys have a phenomenal rest of CONjuration. I miss seeing all of your faces in person, and I know you guys all feel the same way. So, fingers crossed that we will be back next year in full force. But until then, I hope you enjoy the rest of Con. And thanks so much to Chris and Angela and everyone working behind the scenes with all of this stuff, which is beyond me. Thank you guys so much for the time and effort that you're putting into all of that. So I've got, I think, 3 minutes left. Any last minute things before we wrap up? I don't know. All right. Awesome. Well, I guess I will, wrap it up. Look forward to seeing you guys on TikTok or Instagram or wherever you want to connect. Like I said, I'm an author as well. So if you want to talk writing and books, I'm available, and I'm always available for a good Severus Snape discussion. So you are more than welcome to check out things on my TikTok or my Instagram or ChristiJWhitney.com. Absolutely.